I wanted to read this to you last week and I didn't, so I'm going to read it now because I found it interesting that the editor of the Arden Measure for Measure would quote from the Midrash. It's Bereshit Rabbah, for those who know any names in the Midrash. It's commentaries on the Torah in the Talmud by rabbis, and some of them are very imaginative and storytelling, and some of them are fundamental. But this one says the following: "Thus said the Holy One, if I create the world with mercy, sin will abound. And if I create it with justice, how can the world exist? Therefore I create it with both mercy and justice, and may it thus endure." And this is, in the first century, probably around the first century. Christians were thinking about the Sermon on the Mount, in which it says, "With what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." And this is where Shakespeare gets his title for the play. And that implies justice, of course. But it also says in the gospel, "Judge not that you be not judged." So this is a problem for Christians. And it's essentially the problem that St. Augustine faced, or Augustine, or Augustinus, when he had to acknowledge that the Christians were no longer a persecuted minority, but were actually bishops of the various cities and in charge of justice in the city. And if you're turning the other cheek, as the Gospels are telling you to do, how are you going to see to it that the city is run with justice? Because everybody who's a villain just walks all over you. So he went to great labor to articulate the difference between the city of God and the city of man. And in doing so, he established the obligation and the responsibility under God of the Christian prince or bishop to govern with justice tempered with mercy, so that a judge who is rightly appointed or chosen, and particularly a king who's chosen by God, or by implication by God, is obligated to do justice. That is to say, in order to run a Christian society, he's got to punish the malefactors in one way or another. So there was a major distinction between individuals and the state. And we still make that distinction. If somebody harms your relation or your ally, you can't just go shoot him. You have to take him to court, and he has to be found guilty by a jury of his peers. And then the state can put him to death or whatever punishment it sees fit. And we consider that to be, at least those of us who accept capital punishment or any punishment, doesn't have to be capital. We accept the state's both right and obligation to execute punishment. And we also don't accept the individual's right or obligation to do that. In fact, we're forbidden from doing that, because individuals are too likely to be governed by revenge. And the state is ideally constituted to be judging based on justice. But, of course, we've got the problem of justice and mercy. So the state, too, the judge, too, the king, too, has to temper justice with mercy. Otherwise, you have the excesses we talked about last time. Okay, so let's return to Act 2, Scene 4. We stopped in the middle, just before the crucial moment, and I want to read that now and focus on the process of the argumentation as it develops between Isabel and Angelo. Isabella is usually called Isabella by most modern editors, but her name appears in the text as Isabel only. So I tend to call her Isabel. So she enters to Angelo. Remember, his blood is mustering to his heart and beating. He says, "How now, fair maid?" She says, "I am come to know your pleasure." Now, the pleasure of a prince is whatever he wills, right? She doesn't mean your sensual pleasure. But he says, that you might know it would much better please me than to demand what 'tis. That is, I want you to know what I want without asking me to say it. Your brother cannot live. Even so, she says, heaven keep your honor. So God keep you, and she's about to go. There's no Lucio now. She's going to go. She's going to accept his judgment. He thought about it for a day, and he's come to his conclusion, and she obediently is ready to accept it. But then he says, yet may he live a while, and it may be as long as you or I. Yet he must die. Under your sentence? Yea. When, I beseech you, that in his reprieve, longer or shorter, he may be so fitted that his soul sicken not. Remember, yesterday he told her he's going to die tomorrow, and she got all upset. Even for our tables, we kill the fowl of season. So now she's asking when. He says, fie, these filthy vices. It were as good to pardon him that hath from nature stolen a man already made, as to remit their saucy sweetness that do coin heaven's image in stamps that are forbid. Now, that's a perfectly clear metaphor, but it's such a long sentence that it can be daunting. It would be as good to pardon a murderer, that is, him that hath from nature stolen a man already made. You steal a man from nature by killing him. As to forgive their saucy sweetness, saucy meaning delectable, but also disobedient. Their saucy sweetness that do coin heaven's image in stamps that are forbid. There's that money, the coinage image again. Stamping heaven's image. Man is made in God's image in stamps, that is on metal, that's forbidden. So he's saying it would be as good to forgive a murderer as to forgive a fornicator. 'Tis all as easy falsely to take away a life true made as to put metal in restrained means to make a false one. That's the same idea. It's just as easy to kill a man as to beget a child out of wedlock. Isabella, 'tis set down so in heaven, but not in earth. So she's making this distinction. Yes, in heaven it's a sin, that's true. But on earth we don't think of it as bad. Say you so, says Angelo? Then I shall pose you quickly. Which had you rather, that the most just law now took your brother's life, or to redeem him, give up your body to such sweet uncleanness as she that he hath stained, meaning as Juliet? Which would you rather, see your brother die, or give up your virginity like Juliet? Now, she doesn't get where he's going with this. He's a judge. He's the ruler of the city, the deputy. And so he's posing a kind of theoretical question as far as she's concerned. Sir, believe this. I'd rather give my body than my soul. Angelo, I talk not of your soul. Our compelled sins stand more for number than for account. What does that mean? If we're compelled to do a sin, they only count by numbers, but they're not taken seriously. They're counted as sins, but we're not responsible because we're compelled to do it. She says, how say you? Like, what? And then he says, nay, I'll not warrant that, for I can speak against the thing I say. He's also a logician. You're right, I can't defend that. If we commit a sin, it's a sin, it counts as a sin. Answer to this. I, now the voice of the recorded law, pronounce a sentence on your brother's life. Might there not be a charity in sin to save this brother's life? A charity in sin? She still doesn't get what he's talking about. Please you to do it, I'll take it as a peril to my soul. It is no sin at all, but charity. He's saying, wouldn't I be committing a sin? She thinks he's saying, wouldn't I be committing a sin if I let him off? And she says, if that's a sin to be charitable to him, I'll take it on me. Then he says, please you to do it at peril of your soul were equal poise of sin and charity. I'm talking about you doing it. She says that I do beg his life, if it be a sin, heaven let me bear it. You granting of my suit, if that be a sin, I'll make it my morn prayer to have it added to the faults of mine and nothing of your answer. That is, you won't have to answer for it. I'll ask God to count it against me if pleading for his life is a sin and your forgiving him is a sin. Nay, but hear me, your sense pursues not mine. Okay, you have to feel the full weight of the double meaning there. Your understanding of the argument doesn't follow what I'm getting at, and your senses, your physical desires, don't pursue mine. Either you are ignorant or seem so crafty, and that's not good. Is she being crafty? Of course not. Let me be ignorant and in nothing good, but graciously to know I am no better. That's pure humility speaking. I don't need to be called good. I'm telling you, I'm humble. I don't, who gets to be called good? Only Christ. Angelo, thus wisdom wishes to appear most bright when it attacks itself, as these black masks proclaim and shield beauty 10 times louder than beauty could displayed. But mark me, to be received plain, I'll speak more gross. Your brother is to die. So, and his offense is so as it appears accounted to the law upon that pain. She says, true. Admit no other way to save his life, as I subscribe not that nor any other, but in the loss of question, that is, just as a matter of debate or discussion, theoretically, that you, his sister, finding yourself desired of such a person, whose credit with the judge or own great place could fetch your brother from the manacles of the all-binding law, and that there were no earthly mean to save him, but that either you must lay down the treasures of your body to this supposed, or else to let him suffer. What would you do? And she says, as much for my poor brother as myself. That is, were I under the terms of death, the impression of keen whips I'd wear as rubies, and strip myself to death as to a bed that longing have been sick for, ere I'd yield my body up to shame. I would rather be whipped and excoriated and persecuted and tortured and die than willingly to do a sin, to commit a sin. Angelo, notice the interlocking line, my body up to shame, then must your brother die, and it's a hexameter. And 'twere the cheaper way, she says. Better it were a brother died at once than that a sister by redeeming him should die forever. All right, now, everyone in the modern audience thinks, well, this is an outrage. Life, you can't restore, but sex, what's sex? You have a little sex, go your way, big deal. That's how we are taught, how we're raised, how we think, how we like to think. It's very convenient for our sensual selves. But she doesn't live in that world. She lives in the world of the eternal soul and judgment. When you die, you go to judgment. And the consequences of judgment are either heaven or hell. So when she says this, we have to hear this is the novice of a nunnery speaking from the point of view of deep religious faith. And she would rather, for her to think of her brother dying is not for her to think of him annihilated forever. She thinks of his soul going to judgment. And that's why she can say it's were the cheaper way. He says, were not you then as cruel as the sentence that you have slandered so? Aren't you as cruel as I am, being willing to put him to death? She says, rightly, ignominy in ransom and free pardon are of two houses. That is, they're separate, they're distinct. Lawful mercy is nothing kin to foul redemption. It's one thing for you to let him off because you're the judge tempering your justice with mercy. But for me to commit a mortal sin in order to save him doesn't do him any good and doesn't do my eternal soul any good. You seemed of late, says Angelo, to make the law a tyrant, and rather prove the sliding of your brother a merriment than a vice. Well, she had said, many people do it, and he's going to die for it. Come on in.
Thank you.
I'm in Act 2, Scene 4, line about 110. So she says, "Oh, pardon me, my lord. It oft falls out to have what we would have. We speak not what we mean. I something do excuse the thing I hate for his advantage that I dearly love." She does feel for her brother. She has tried to excuse the sin, but that's not the same as asking her to take the same sin on her own soul now as a free act of will. Angelo, we are all frail. She says, "Else let my brother die. If not a federe, but only he owe and succeed thy weakness." That is, if my brother's the only one guilty of this kind of weakness, fine, let him die. And Angelo said, "We're all frail." And she says, "Yes, that's right. Otherwise, it would be right to let him die because he'd be the unique in villainy." Angelo, "Nay, women are frail too. That's what he's banking on." Isabella, "Aye, as the glasses where they view themselves," meaning mirrors, "which are as easy broke as they make forms." You can break a mirror as easily as it reflects an image. "Women, help heaven," she says. "Men their creation mar by profiting by them." In profiting by them. "Nay, call us 10 times frail, for we are soft as our complexions are, and credulous to false prints." Our complexions doesn't just mean our skin, although it includes that. It means the whole makeup of the human person, based on the idea of the 4 humors that go together to make up a person, and the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water. The 4 humors are blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and the qualities are hot and cold and moist and dry. And the combination of those in the person makes up the complex or complexion of that person. And when they're balanced, the person is said to be in temper or in temperament. And to lose one's temper is to go off in one direction or the other, and losing one's temper now is just going off in the direction of excess choler or anger. In any case, she's saying women's complexions are soft by compared with the complexions of men, and they are credulous to false prints. They believe when it's that stamping of the image on metal again. We're the stuff that gets stamped with the image put upon us by our makers, by our husbands, by our lords, by men, as well, of course, as by God. Angelo says, "I think it well, that is, women are frail, and from this testimony of your own sex, since I suppose we are made to be no stronger than faults may shake our frames," we're all made frail, so we can all have faults, "let me be bold. I do arrest your words. Be that you are," that is, be that which you are, that is, a woman, meaning be frail. "If you be more, you're none. If you be one, as you are well expressed by all external warrants, you look like a woman. Show it now by putting on the destined livery." Livery means the official clothing of somebody in service. And what he means by that is becoming pregnant. Isabella, "I have no tongue but one, gentle my lord. Let me entreat you speak the former language." I don't get where this is going, and I don't like it, so go back to where we were. "Plainly conceive," he says, and conceive is also a double meaning. "I love you." Is there anyone in the room that doesn't want to hit him right now?
Suey.
And she says, my brother did love Juliet, and you tell me that he shall die for it. Is that a hard line? Is Shakespeare difficult? My brother did love Juliet, and you tell me that he shall die for it. He says, he shall not, Isabel, if you give me love. So she says, I know your virtue hath a license in it, which seems a little fouler than it is, to pluck on others. In other words, the ruler has the right of entrapment. You can get in disguise and go just like a policeman hiding behind the billboard and checking your speed. The state has a right to do that just to see how you're going to behave. So she imagines that he's testing her to see what she's really made of. And then he says, believe me, on mine honor, that is, he's swearing by his honor, my words express my purpose. And she grabs at his phrase. Ha! Little honor to be much believed, and most pernicious purpose. Seeming. I will proclaim thee, Angelo, look for it. Sign me a present pardon for my brother, or with an outstretched throat I'll tell the world aloud what man thou art. Good for her, right? Seeming. Hence shall we see, if power change purpose, what our seemers be, the Duke said in the first scene. Or not the first scene, but the third scene, I guess. His answer to her threat is, who will believe thee, Isabel? My unsoiled name, the austereness of my life, my vouch against you, and my place in the state will so your accusation overweigh that you shall stifle in your own report and smell of calumny. Everybody's going to think you're lying and making this up because of my position, my place, my reputation for virtue. I have begun, and now I give my sensual race the rein, like a horse allowed to run. Fit thy consent to my sharp appetite. That's appetite now. We're not even in love anymore. We're just down to sensual desire, lust. Fit thy consent to my sharp appetite. Lay by all nicety and prolixious blushes that banish what they sue for. He's still accusing her of wanting what he's offering secretly. Redeem thy brother by yielding up thy body to my will. Remember I told you about the word will the other day, that it means free will, and it also means willfulness, and it also means sensual or sexual desire. Redeem thy brother by yielding up thy body to my will, or else he must not only die the death, but thy unkindness shall his death draw out to lingering sufferance. I'm going to make him suffer. I'm going to torture him, and then I'm going to kill him. Now, what is he asking her? He's not saying, marry me. He's just saying, sleep with me. Answer me tomorrow, or by the affection that now guides me most. So affection doesn't mean what we mean by it, like what you feel for your dog or your brother-in-law's children. It means an affectio, an invasion of a passion, of a powerful emotional passion that can take over the mind and govern it. Or by the affection that now guides me most, I'll prove a tyrant to him. As for you, say what you can, my false o'erweighs your true. Now he knows he's being false, right? But he can't stop, or doesn't anyway, stop himself. He's in a state. So she says in soliloquy, to whom should I complain? Did I tell this, who would believe me? Just what he said. O perilous mouths that bear in them one and the selfsame tongue, either of condemnation or of proof, bidding the law make curtsy to their will, hooking both right and wrong to the appetite to follow as it draws. That is, the place of the judge or the ruler who can determine right and wrong in terms of the law, in terms of government, in terms of justice, and then can succumb to his own desires and twist it to serve them. I'll to my brother, though he hath fallen by prompture of the blood, yet hath he in him such a mind of honor, that had he 20 heads to tender down on 20 bloody blocks, he'd yield them up before his sister should her body stoop to such abhorred pollution. Then Isabel live chaste, and brother die. More than our brother is our chastity. I'll tell him yet of Angelo's request, and fit his mind to death for his soul's rest. I cannot tell you how many generations of critics are dismissive, if not worse, about Isabella for these lines. They hate her. They think she's a prude. They think she's stuck up. They think she's as bad as Angelo in the opposite direction, and fake and false. And it's all wrong. And the reason they think it is they live after the sexual revolution, not even of the 60s, but of the 20s. Or we can put it back to the French Revolution if we want. And they just don't see it in Christian terms. But why is more than our brother is our chastity? Her brother, if he dies, is being punished for something he did do. And if he repents, his soul will go to heaven. But if she gives up willingly her chastity, she's committing a sin, and she can't later repent for it later. If she knows she shouldn't do it now and doesn't want to do it now, it stays with her. So her immortal soul and his immortal soul are what is at issue. And just punishment for his actual crime, particularly if he repents, yields to heaven. But willfully doing this sin to her leads to hell. Yep.
But I don't get he was contracted to marry her. He and Juliet were supposed to be married. You explain the different kinds of marriages.
Right,
and
correct.
They were, for all intents and purposes,
You're absolutely right.
married.
And this is why we are so impatient with Angelo for not taking that into consideration, but simply going by the letter of the law. I mean, the whole tradition is arguing about the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And clearly, by the end of this play, the spirit of the law is going to redeem poor Claudio. And she's calling for Angelo to do that. And Angelo, if he were living up to his name, would do that. But he is not. He is holding to the letter of the law out of his own sense of his own virtue, and now it's revealed that his virtue doesn't go all the way down, right? So it becomes a drama between the spirit and the letter of the law. She is totally consistent. It's Angelo that's making us so angry by being so harsh. Lori, did you have a...
No, I scratched my...
Oh, I thought you... Okay. It's all right. Okay. So we're going to see what happens now. Now remember, we're in the middle of the drama, so we can't expect resolution right here. But it will come, I promise you. Act 3, Scene 1. The Duke comes in, disguised as the friar now. He's called Friar Lodowick. That's a made-up name. He's actually the Duke. To talk to Claudio in prison. Claudio says, I have hope to live and am prepared to die. And the Duke has this very odd speech. Be absolute for death. Either death or life shall thereby be the sweeter. Reason thus with life. If I do lose thee, I do lose a thing that none but fools would keep. A breath thou art, servile to all the skyey influences that dost his habitation where thou keepst hourly afflict. Merely thou art death's fool, for him thou laborest by thy flight to shun, and yet runst toward him still. You know the story about death at Amara? So the man meets death, who's shocked, and the man is shocked. And death says, wow, I'm really surprised to see you here. I thought I was going to find you over there. And the man says, ah! And he runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. And he gets to this place where he thinks he's safe, and that's where death meets him, and he dies. So the idea is he's running from death, but he only got scared by death and started running from death to where death was planning to meet him in the first place. It's a scary story. Thou art not noble, for all the accommodations that thou bearest are nursed by baseness. Thou art by no means valiant, for thou dost fear the soft and tender fork of a poor worm, meaning a snake. Thy best of rest is sleep, and that thou oft provokest, yet grossly fearest thy death, which is no more. To die, to sleep, no more, says Hamlet. Thou art not thyself, for thou exists on many 1,000 grains that issue out of dust. Happy thou art not, for what thou hast not still, meaning always, thou strives to get, and what thou hast, forgettest. Okay, do we know this? You're always striving to get something. When you get it, then you get used to it, and then you forget it, and then you're striving to get something else. Thou art not certain, for thy complexion, remember that word, shifts to strange effects after the moon. If thou art rich, thou art poor, for like an ass whose back with ingots bows, thou bearest thy heavy riches, but a journey and death unloads thee. Friend hast thou none, for thine own bowels, that means your children, which do call thee sire, the mere effusion of thy proper loins, do curse the gout serpigo in the room for ending thee no sooner. You don't have any friend, for even your own offspring can't wait for you to die so they can inherit your money. Thou hast nor youth nor age, but as it were an after-dinner sleep, dreaming on both. For all thy blessed youth becomes as aged, and doth beg the alms of palsied eld. And when thou art old and rich, thou hast neither heat, affection, limb, nor beauty to make thy riches pleasant. Notice, he's avoiding all spiritual ideas. What's yet in this that bears the name of life? Yet in this life lie hid more 1,000 deaths, yet death we fear that makes these odds all even. What kind of a speech is this for a friar to give a person who's about to die? It's not a very Christian speech. It's not a priestly or a confessor. So first of all, the Duke is in disguise as a friar. He's not really a friar. He's more of a duke. And so a duke, he's had a classical education. What he's speaking here are the classic words of a Stoic philosophy, which is exhorting people not to be attached to things, not to be attached even to life. It's an illusion. You're going to die anyway. You might as well not embrace it. It's almost a Buddhist idea, and live in terms of virtue and live in terms of, the moment, but don't run away from death because you're going to die anyway. So, and it's a kind of classical reconciliation to death. Now, why would he want to tell this to Claudio? Why does he want to go through this whole list of the negatives of life? Because what's Claudio's mistake? What's Claudio been? Too attached to the physical world, too attached to his pleasures, to the now. Because he wouldn't wait to get married, right? Had to go to bed too soon, which is what got him in trouble. So the Duke is kind of counteracting Claudius's, let's call it sensual or worldly or self-indulgent nature with this kind of stoical detachment. And it works temporarily. Claudio says, I humbly thank you. To sue to live, I find I seek to die, and seeking death, find life. Let it come on. So he's been persuaded by this rational logic of detachment, and he can accept dying. Until. So Isabel comes in. The Duke goes behind to listen, and we can see him overhearing the conversation. So we skip to line 53 or so. Claudio says, "Now, sister, what's the comfort? Were you able to succeed at persuading Angelo to let me live?" Isabella, "Why, as all comforts are, most good indeed. Lord Angelo, having affairs to heaven, intends you for his swift ambassador, where you shall be an everlasting lieger." That is, you're going to live in the court of heaven as a liegeman to God. "Therefore, your best appointment make with speed. Tomorrow you set on." She figures it as a journey, as an ambassadorial journey from earth to heaven. Claudio, "Is there no remedy?" Isabel is not going to lie to him. "None but such remedy as to save a head, to cleave a heart in twain." "But is there any?" "Yes, brother, you may live. There is a devilish mercy in the judge, if you'll implore it, that will free your life, but fetter you to death. Fetter you till death. Put you in leg irons. Perpetual durance, meaning imprisoned for life. Aye, just perpetual durance, she means metaphorically. A restraint, though all the world's vastity you had, to a determined scope. You could travel through all the world, but you'd still be imprisoned. What does she mean? But in what nature? In such a one as you, consenting to it, would bark your honor from that trunk you bear and leave you naked. Strip the bark off. Let me know the point. Oh, I do fear thee, Claudio, she says, and I quake lest thou a feverous life should entertain, and 6 or 7 winters more respect than a perpetual honor. Darest thou die? The sense of death is most in apprehension, and the poor beetle that we tread upon in corporal sufferance finds a pang as great as when a giant dies. And he says, Honorable Claudio, why give you me this shame? Think you I can a resolution fetch from flowery tenderness? If I must die, I will encounter darkness as a bride and hug it in mine arms. I'm noble. I'm the son of a noble father. If I have to die, I'll die nobly. Good. There spake my brother, she says. There my father's grave did utter forth a voice. Yes, thou must die. Thou art too noble to conserve a life in base appliances. This outward sainted deputy, whose settled visage and deliberate word nips youth in the head, and follies doth enew as falcon doth the fowl, is yet a devil. His filth within being cast, that means brought out and revealed, he would appear a pond as deep as hell. Claudio, the Prenzi Angelo? Oh, says Isabella, 'tis the cunning livery of hell, the damneth body to invest and cover in Prenzi guards. What does Prenzi mean? I'm asking you a fake question. I'm setting you up, where I did poor Lori last Tuesday. Prenzi exists only 2 times in the entire history of the English language. One of them is in line 94, and one of them is in line 96. Or 93 and 96. And we don't know what it means. And it's never used again in Shakespeare or anywhere else. And it's a misprint, probably. And nobody knows.
It's kind of interesting when you think about how many words he either coined or were first used in that, that a meaning wouldn't have come to this word and it wouldn't have become part of the...
Because it's not used anywhere else, and because it appears within 2 lines here, and we don't know what it means in either of them.
Which is the word again?
Prenzi, P-R-E-N-Z-I-E. So most of the critics, the editors, have thought it was a misprint, a misread word by the typesetter for something else. And so they've guessed. Does it mean precise? Does it mean something else? We don't know. Now she's going to tell him what the story is. Dost thou think, Claudio, if I would yield him my virginity, thou mightst be freed? Claudio, oh heavens, it cannot be. Yes, he would give it thee from this rank offense, so to offend him still, meaning forever, always. Still means always. He'll be offended forever if he really succeeded in doing this. This night's the time that I should do what I abhor to name, or else thou diest tomorrow. Claudio, thou shalt not do it. One line. Or else thou diest tomorrow, thou shalt not do it. That's one iambic pentameter line. Well, good for Claudio, right?
For about 2 seconds.
For now. His father's grave uttered forth a voice. He's saying the honorable thing. She says, oh, were it but my life, I'd throw it down for your deliverance as frankly as a pin. Do we believe her?
No. Yes. I don't. I think she's a hypocrite.
You're a tough cookie.
I am.
I believe her. She's ready to give her life to God and live in a convent. It's not her life that she cares about. It's not her body that she cares about. It's her immortal soul. And she's willing to die as a martyr if it would save him.
I think she's a hypocrite, and I think he's also a hypocrite. Claudio, he really doesn't want to, and he's not willing. He's going to show us in a moment.
Yeah.
So neither one is really.
All right. Now, Lori, I want you to distinguish for me.
Set me up again.
I'm going to set you up, but this time you're free to answer in any way you want.
Thank you.
What is the difference between a fallible person and a hypocrite?
That's not an easy question.
I know. It's a hard question.
Yeah.
So a hypocrite, literally, is a person who is intentionally fooling other people when he knows he doesn't believe something he's saying.
That's exactly what Claudia's doing coming up. And I think that's exactly what she's doing. I think she wants everyone to think she's a
Okay,
saint.
if Shakespeare wanted us to know that Claudio was a hypocrite,
Yes.
he would give us soliloquies in which he tells us what he really thinks, like Iago, and then, we're going to see that next week,
I'm not where I am.
right? And then publicly he'd say something else. That's a hypocrite. Angelo
That's what Angela.
is being a hypocrite,
Okay.
right? He's pretending to this virtue that he doesn't really have. Now, it turns out that even Angelo isn't a studied hypocrite because this lust for Isabella has surprised him completely. But you're telling me that that these two people are intending to fool each other. And I'm saying that's a different thing from suddenly discovering that you have a flaw, that you're weak, that you really do hold this as a value, but you're too weak to live up to it.
Right, you know,
I'm saying that's a different thing.
I don't know. He says, I want my father to respect me. I'm going to do what's right. And then in the end, he says, no, I really want to live.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that could be for two reasons. He could have known all along that he was lying
Yeah.
and really think this, or he could think he thinks this and be telling the truth as he sees it and then suddenly feel differently.
I think he was pretending.
Okay. I disagree with you, but you're allowed to think what you want.
You're wrong.
He's too weak.
Weak is what he really is.
Yes.
Right.
That's different than pretending.
Correct.
And, yeah, I don't think we have any proof that she would be not telling the truth. I mean,
I think she joined the nunnery, whatever, to me, because she wanted to be thought of as a saint.
Thought of.
She wanted,
Okay, what would a character have to be for you to believe that she really wanted to be a saint and didn't just want to be thought of as a saint?
Well, I don't think it's saintly to say, I care more, I don't want you to live.
She didn't say
she
that.
didn't say that. She said, I'd rather give up my life
yes.
than my eternal soul
And
or
then,
my
and she said,
virginity.
and if it weren't for this, I would die for you in a second. I don't believe that for a second.
Why not?
I just don't.
Do you believe it's possible for someone to mean it?
For For someone to what?
To mean it.
Yes, I guess I don't buy her.
I know. So what I'm trying to say is, what character would you buy who said this? I think you are so suspicious of anybody saying this that you wouldn't buy anyone saying it. You'd think a person has to be a hypocrite to say this.
No, I think I think.
You don't think so?
That I would not think, or that I believe in, that I would.
Okay, good. So there is the possibility of being a saint.
Yes.
You just don't think Isabel is.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll take that.
Okay. So let's see what happens. Were it but my life, I'd throw it down for your deliverance as frankly as a pin. Thanks, dear Isabel, says Claudio. Be ready, Claudio, for your death tomorrow. Claudio says, yes. And then he starts to think. Has he affections in him? Remember that word affections, meaning Angelo, that thus can make him bite the law by the nose when he would force it? Sure, it is no sin, or of the deadly seven, it is the least. What's he doing?
He's justifying
His feeling.
lust.
Right, he's rationalizing. If it were a sin, the famously virtuous Angelo wouldn't do this. And if it's a deadly sin, we know there are 7 deadly sins, it's the least, which is actually true. The 7 sins are pride, envy, anger, sloth, gluttony, avarice, gluttony, and lust. And Dante puts them in that order of purgation, going up through purgatory. And pride has to be purged first before you can purge the others, because it's the foundation of all the others. And the last is lust, and everybody has to be purged of lust. It's kind of a universal thing. So it's the least worst of the mortal sins. They're called mortal sins or deadly sins or root sins because they're the root of all other sins, according to the doctrine of the church. Every other kind of sin and crime arises from one of these 7 root sinful causes. So he's saying, well, maybe it's not the worst. About her doing it, not about himself. Which is the least, she says. If it were damnable, he being so wise, why would he for the momentary trick be perdurably fined? Why would he for the momentary trick, which is the very momentary trick that Claudio engaged in, not to mention Lucio, be fined forever, perdurably? Oh, Isabel, what says my brother? Death is a fearful thing, Isabella, and shamed life a hateful. Aye, says Claudio, but to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion, he means the body, to become a kneaded clod, and the delighted spirit. Okay, what happens to the delighted spirit when it leaves the body behind? One of 2 things, but he's only thinking of one of them. And the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick-ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds, and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worst, of those that lawless and in certain thought imagine howling, 'tis too horrible. The weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise compared to what we fear of death. All right, what's he afraid of in death?
His soul being damned.
Damnation, literally damnation. We've got all 4 elements here contributing to the punishment of his soul after death. All right, so we've got floods, fire, water, in the form of ice, winds, air, and the pendant world is earth. And so all these 4 elements are contributing to the images in his mind. They're all classical images of the punishments of hell. That's what he's imagining. Now, how does a Christian avoid that?
Repentance.
Right, repent. He's not even thinking about that. He's just terrified of dying. Isabella, alas, alas. Then he says, "Sweet sister, let me live. What sin you do to save a brother's life, nature dispenses with the deed so far that it becomes a virtue."
And she calls him a beast.
And he is. Because what is she experiencing right this minute? Who is this? It's her brother. What's he doing? Abandoning her. Not only abandoning her, exhorting her to sin. And who's he in league with by this choice?
It's the devil.
Angelo. Or the devil.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, she's abandoning him and he's abandoning her. I think they're both.
Okay, I'm going to say this once, and I'll probably repeat it 100 times.
Okay.
She is abandoning his physical life in favor of his soul. He is abandoning her soul.
Okay.
You see?
I see it.
Now, that's how the audience will see it, or Shakespeare's audience, and that's how Shakespeare means us to see it. And we don't see it because we are not suffused with that kind of mentality.
But, and again, spoiler alert, she goes along with the whole bed trip.
Okay, we're
So-
going to get to that. You're ahead of me.
Yeah,
Keep this in mind. We'll talk about it. I'm not going to abandon you. So let me live. It's not a sin. It's a virtue. Okay, you do what's going to hurt you and your soul in order that I can live. So now she flies into a passion. "Oh, you beast! Oh, faithless coward! Oh, dishonest wretch! Wilt thou be made a man out of my vice? Is it not a kind of incest to take life from thine own sister's shame? What should I think? Heaven shield my mother played my father fair, for such a warped slip of wilderness ne'er issued from his blood. I hope my mother didn't sleep around, because my father would never have begotten such a hopeless slip of wilderness, offspring. Take my defiance, die, perish. Might but my bending down reprieve thee from thy fate, it should proceed. I'll pray 1,000 prayers for thy death, no word to save thee." It's pretty harsh. "Nay, hear me, Isabel. Oh, fie, fie, fie. Thy sin's not accidental. That is a one-time slip with Juliet, but a trade. Mercy to thee would prove itself a bawd. 'Tis best that thou diest quickly. Mercy to thee would prove itself a bawd." Just the theme that Aeschylus was talking about. You show too much mercy, it just produces more sin. "Oh, hear me, Isabella." And the Duke, there it says Isabella. And the Duke comes forward and says, whoa, let's chat about this. "Young sister, but one word." All right, now, I grant you that it took me a long time, and I had to have help in understanding this reaction of Isabel. Here she is, supposed to be going into a nunnery, and she's not speaking with what we would normally call charity. She's in a rage. But you have to remember that she is under attack. So I'm going to read you a passage from Philip Thompson about this very speech. And I'm not saying it will convince you, but it convinced me. He says, "We are not to judge Isabella by asking if her condemnation of Claudio is the becoming response of a loving sister to her desperate brother. When we rightly ask if it is the just response to what is a particularly craven form of personal injustice, we must be both morally and aesthetically blind if our demand for good feeling leads us to condemn a character whose feelings and moral sense are both outraged by Claudio's deadly, cowardly, and utterly selfish plea. And doesn't anyone notice that by afflicting him with justice, Isabella makes him a just man?" So we're going to see at the end of the play how this applies. And I'll read the rest of this when we get there. "His soul would have been lost if Isabella had not portrayed him to himself as a lost soul." So the first thing to know is that she is under attack. She flies into a rage when she's attacked by Angelo. she flies into another when she's attacked by her brother. And they're now in cahoots. They both want her to sleep with Angelo to save his life. Would it save his life if she did sleep with Angelo?
Probably not.
Not only probably not, actually not. We find out that it doesn't, because Angelo thinks he sleeps with her, and he goes through with it as fast as he can. Okay. So the Duke says to Claudio, Isabella goes aside, line 158, "Son, I have overheard what hath passed between you and your sister. Angelo had never the purpose to corrupt her." He's lying. "Only he hath made an assay," meaning a test of her virtue, "to practice his judgment with the disposition of natures. She, having the truth of honor in her, hath made him that gracious denial which he is most glad to receive." Now, he's telling us too, he's lying to Claudio, but he's telling us that it was a gracious denial, that her denial was full of grace. It was the right thing. He says, "I am confessor to Angelo, and I know this to be true. Therefore, prepare yourself to death. Do not satisfy your resolution with hopes that are fallible. Tomorrow you must die. Go to your knees and make ready." Why is he saying this to him? Why is he lying to him? He was just testing her. He didn't really mean it. What's he trying to get Claudio to realize about himself? That he's grasping at straws. That his weakness is condemning his sister to a lifetime of guilt and sin to save his own life. And that when the Duke says, "No, that's an illusion. There's no such thing going on," he says, "You're right." And what does he say? "Let me ask my sister pardon. I am so out of love with life that I will stoop to be rid of it." That's the key to Claudio. Let me ask my sister pardon. He sees that he was wrong. Not just because of the lie that the Duke is telling him, but because he needs to see through this ruse as a false path to his own salvation. And repentance and asking for pardon is the true path. Okay, then the Duke speaks to Isabel, and I'm not going to read all the prose of it. It's a beautiful passage, but the point is that I've got an idea. I've got an idea how to solve this. And Shakespeare is taking this from a bunch of ancient stories. It's the old bed trick story. He uses it in several plays, including All's Well That Ends Well, around the same time as this. And he tells us about Mariana. Now, it's important to know what the situation is with Mariana. At line 211, "I've heard of the good lady, and good words went with her name. That she has a good reputation." The Duke says, "She should this Angelo..." Now, this is what the Duke has known all along, that he didn't tell the friar and he didn't tell us until now. "She should this Angelo have married, was affianced by her oath, and the nuptial appointed, between which time of the contract and limit of the solemnity, her brother Frederick was wracked at sea, having in that perished vessel the dowry of his sister." But mark how heavily this befell to the poor gentlewoman. All right, so they were betrothed and committed, and all that lacked was the outward order of the marriage, waiting for the dowry. The dowry gets lost, and what does Angelo do? Dumped her. There she lost a noble and renowned brother in his love toward her ever most kind and natural, with him the portion and sinew of her fortune, her marriage dowry, with both her combinate husband, this well-seeming Angelo. He left her in tears, dried not one of them, swallowed his vows whole, pretending in her discoveries of dishonor. Pretending in her discoveries of dishonor. He pretends that she's been discovered to be unchaste. Mariana. It's false. And few bestowed her on her own lamentation, which she yet wears for his sake. And he, a marble to her tears, is washed with them, but relents not. What merit were it in death to take this poor maid from the world? They hate her for saying this too. But remember her Christian imagination. It would be a mercy for her to die and go to heaven. What corruption in this life that it will let this man live? Now, she's furious with him, of course. So, what is it? Mariana still loves Angelo. And the Duke says, let's do this. Let's entrap Angelo. We'll say yes. We'll make him think he's going to sleep with you. We'll put Mariana in your place. And then we'll have him. What good is going to come of that? None?
Well, Angelo won't save Claudia.
True. But good comes of it anyway, because the Duke's watching.
Wouldn't Angelo be getting his just desserts? Isn't that poetic justice?
Absolutely. But it's more than poetic justice. It's actual justice. And it's justice for Mariana.
Yes.
Okay, we'll come to that. All right, in Act 3, Scene 2, Lucio begins to malign the Duke. And I want you just to have a very vivid sense of the sin of slandering the Duke. We live in a society with a First Amendment. And the First Amendment allows us the freedom of speech. We can say whatever we want about our governors and our president and our congressmen. As long as we're not fomenting violence or shouting fire in a crowded theater when there isn't a fire, we can say whatever we want to whomever we want, whenever we want. That's the freedom that we have established according to our ideas of individual liberty and justice and the best kind of polity to have. But in the Renaissance hierarchical world, to slander a prince meant to undermine the foundations of society, to invite people to rebellion and chaos and destruction. And Shakespeare's society, when he wrote this play, had come through 100 years of civil war. And that civil war came because of power struggles among the upper echelons and also religious wars and persecutions. So you couldn't say anything you wanted to. You had to say only what was approved by the monarch. And if you accused the monarch, then that was sedition or slander, and you could be executed for it. And the ideal is not freedom of speech. The ideal, of course, is truth, but it's also order and harmony under a rightful prince governing hierarchically. So you don't want to undermine that, because then what you end up with is mob rule. And Shakespeare was the enemy of mob rule, as he shows us in many plays. So we get a little bit, I'm just going to read a little bit of Lucio slandering the Duke. At line 82 in Act 3, Scene 2, line 82 or so. Lucio says, "What news, friar, of the Duke?" Now, he doesn't know he's talking to the Duke, he's talking to the friar. But we know it's the Duke. "I know none. Can you tell me of any?" Lucio, "Some say he's with the Emperor of Russia, others some he is in Rome, but where is he, think you? I know not where, but wheresoever, I wish him well," the Duke says in the person of the friar. Lucio, "It was a mad, fantastical trick of him to steal from the state and usurp the beggary he was never born to." That is, usurp the lower position from his higher position. "Lord Angelo dukes it well in his absence. He puts transgression to it." Duke, "He does well in it. A little more lenity to lechery would do no harm in him. Something too crabbed that way, friar. It is too general a vice, and severity must cure it." That's the Duke's principle of putting Angelo in power. And he's justifying the ruler. He doesn't want Lucio going around maligning the Duke's deputy, even though he now knows what Angelo has done. "They say this Angelo was not made by man and woman after the downright way of creation. How should he be made then? Some report a sea maid spawned him, some that he was begot between two stockfishes. But it is certain that when he makes water, his urine is congealed ice. That I know to be true." What a ruthless thing is this in him for the rebellion of a codpiece to take away the life of a man. The codpiece is the pouch in which men wore their genitals when they wore the tights and hose. So it's a euphemism. Would the Duke that is absent have done this? Now, he says, ere he would have hanged a man for the getting 100 bastards, he would have paid for the nursing 1,000. He had some feeling of the sport. He knew the service, and that instructed him to mercy. He's accusing the Duke, without knowing it, of sleeping around. The Duke, I never heard the absent Duke much detected for women. He was not inclined that way. Oh, sir, you are deceived. 'Tis not possible. I'm not deceived about who I actually am. Who? Not the Duke? Yes, your beggar of 50. And his use was to put a ducat, a ducat, a little duke, in her clack dish. A clack dish is a wooden bowl that the poor, the beggars, would hold to collect coins in so they could eat. But, of course, there's a sexual innuendo here. The Duke had crotchets in him. He would be drunk, too. That, let me inform you. You do him wrong, surely. You're maligning the Duke. Sir, I was an inward of his. That is, I was a close friend of his. A shy fellow was the Duke, and I believe I know the cause of his withdrawing. What might be the cause? No, it's a secret. I can't tell you. The Duke was held to be wise by most of the people. Why, no question, but he was. A very superficial, ignorant, unweighing fellow. Okay, this is all funny and hilarious because we know what's going on. It's dramatic irony. Later, Lucio's going to pay for it. And I want to read line 175, when Lucio finally goes out and the Duke says, and this is, to me, a universally applicable speech. No might nor greatness in mortality can censure scape. Back wounding calumny, the whitest virtue strikes. What king so strong can tie the gall up in the slanderous tongue? And then, what does he mean here? It doesn't matter how good you are or how great you are. If you're famous or you're known or you have power, you're going to be slandered. You're going to be accused. And no one can escape this. I have used this speech to illustrate what I think the critics do to this play. It's not only Lucio who maligns the Duke. It's the critics, many of them. Or Isabel, for that matter. We just like to do that. We like to take him down a peg. We like to bring him down to our own level. All right, then the Duke complains about what's going on in society. What's the news abroad in the world, says Aeschylus. The Duke, as the friar, says, none but that there is so great a fever on goodness that the dissolution of it must cure it. That's an image from sexual disease again. You only get cured of it by the fever killing you. Novelty is only in request. Now, novelty to us is a good thing. We have novelty shops. We go shopping for gifts for our friends and we buy novelties. Something new. If you listen to the commercials on television or radio or a newspaper or wherever, if it says new, it's going to be better. We believe in progress, so new is better. So new is a sales point. In the 50s and 60s on television, there wasn't a item for sale that didn't say new. But for Shakespeare, who believed that the world was getting worse, not better, that things were best in their beginnings and were careening downhill towards the end of days, novelty means something worse. So novelty is only in request, and it is as dangerous to be aged in any kind of course as it is virtuous to be constant in any undertaking. There is scarce truth enough alive to make societies secure, but security enough to make fellowships accursed. Much upon this riddle runs the wisdom of the world. This news is old enough, yet it is every day's news. In other words, things are getting worse. People lie, people fake, there's misplaced trust, there's a false sense of security. And then he has a soliloquy at line 249. He who the sword of heaven will bear should be as holy as severe. Do you remember the two principles from Tuesday night? Justice and mercy. So the two powers that he gave into Angelo's hands. So you need to be as holy as you are severe. He has to be as merciful as just. Pattern in himself to know, grace to stand and virtue go. He needs to judge others by looking at himself. Just what everyone was asking Angelo to do in judging Claudio that he kept refusing to do. More nor less to others paying than by self-offenses weighing. Shame to him whose cruel striking kills for faults of his own liking. Twice treble shame on Angelo to weed my vice and let his grow. Oh, what may man within him hide, though angel on the outward side, Angelo. All right, we're skipping the next 4 lines because there are some lines missing, and it's kind of confusing. Craft against vice I must apply. Craft against vice I must apply. With Angelo tonight shall lie his old betrothed, but despised, so disguise shall, by the disguised, pay with falsehood, false exacting, and perform an old contracting. There's the justice you were talking about before. So craft against vice. You have to be innocent as doves, but you have to be wily as snakes. That's from the New Testament. The ruler's got to be crafty. He's got to know man. He's got to judge him by himself. He's got to know himself. And then he has to use whatever he has to use to make the society just. And so that's the trick. Now, it makes for good theatrical drama, too, that we know this is going on and they don't. Okay. Let's just go to...
But this goes beyond, like, he is sacrificing Mariana's purity. I mean, because presumably they had not been together.
Correct.
So...
She's still a virgin.
I mean, this is not like a hero, let's pretend you're dead, I mean, this is like giving someone's soul up. I mean, if, yeah. What?
I didn't think Marianne was a virgin.
Oh, yeah.
I thought they'd already been together.
No.
No.
They were betrothed. She's virtuous. Good words went with her name. She wouldn't sleep with him before marriage.
And that's a bad thing to do to her.
Oh, yeah?
What?
Are you still going to think that at the end of the play?
I still do. I mean, I don't.
All right, I better do some work to justify them. Let's see. All right, let's just read a little comedy for a minute, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll finish the play. Pompey comes in to the prison. He's been caught again, and he's been put in jail. And
Scene 2.
Act 4, Scene 3. And he's comes in with a bit of soliloquy about what he's seeing in the jail. So it gives a little of the subplot comedy. He says, I'm as well acquainted here, and in prose, I'm as well acquainted here as I was in our house of profession, in the brothel. Everybody knows me here like they knew me there. It's the same people. One would think it were Mistress Overdone's own house. For here be many of her old customers. First, here's young Master Rash. He's in for a commodity of brown paper and old ginger, £69 pounds, of which he made 5 marks ready money. So he buys them on credit and sells them and doesn't pay back the money. Marry, then ginger was not much in request, for the old women were all dead. Old women apparently liked ginger. Then is there here one Master Caper, at the suit of Master Threepile the mercer, for some 4 suits of peach-colored satin, which now peaches him a beggar. Then have we here young Dizzy, and young Master Deep Vow, and Master Copperspur, and Master Starve Lackey, the rapier and dagger man, and young Drop Air that killed Lusty Pudding. That is, he's a murderer. And Master Forthright, the tilter, and brave Master Shoe Tie, the great traveler. Shakespeare didn't approve of traveling just to travel. And As You Like It, Rosalind says, I fear you've spent your fortune seeing other men's land and have lost your own. And wild half-can that stabbed pots. Can and pot are both terms for drinking vessels. And I think 40 more, all great doers in our trade. They're all also denizens of the brothel and are now for the Lord's sake. What does that mean? In Elizabethan and Renaissance prisons, the prisoners weren't fed particularly by the prison. They had to go to the bars and stick their arms out with a cup and ask for alms from passersby. And with that, whatever coins they got that way, they could buy food in the prison. They had to pay for it. And what they would do is stick their arms out and cry, for the Lord's sake, for the Lord's sake. So Jesus said, in so much as you do this for one of the least of these, you're doing it for me. So people would give them money to eat if they were feeling charitable. So that's what it means to be for the Lord's sake, meaning in jail. All right. Then we find out that Barnardine refuses to die, and the Duke keeps saying, no, you're a murderer, you've been found guilty, you gotta die. And he says, I'm not gonna die today, I'm drunk, I'm not feeling up to it, leave me alone. He goes back to his cell. And the Duke says, it would be really awful to execute this guy, but we have to do it because Claudio, etc. And the provost comes in and says, there's a guy in prison that died, a notorious pirate, a man of Claudio's years. He just died of a cruel fever this morning. Why don't we send in his head? And the Duke says, 'tis an accident that heaven provides. Nobody gets killed in this play. Not even Barnardine. Heaven kills Ragozine, who deserved it. All right, so they do that. Now, the most important thing about this intermediate section, it's all kind of developing the plot. I'm not going to go through it all, but it's important to remember that the minute that Claudio is done with what he thinks is Isabella, but is really Mariana, he goes back to his rooms and he sends a message to the provost to execute Claudio early, on the spot. And we're going to see what he says why. At Act 4, Scene 4. At the end of Act 4, Scene 4. Angelo has another soliloquy. Okay, he has gone to bed with what he thinks is Isabel, but it's really Mariana. He doesn't know it. And then he has sent to have Claudio executed, though he promised that Claudio would live if Isabella slept with him. So he's broken his word. And he says, this deed unshapes me quite, makes me unpregnant and dull to all proceedings. A deflowered maid, and by an eminent body that enforced the law against it. By me, in other words. But that her tender shame will not proclaim against her maiden loss, how might she tongue me? She's too embarrassed to admit her unchaste behavior. If she weren't too embarrassed, she could talk about me in public and it would be no good. Yet reason dares her no, for my authority bears off a credent bulk that no particular scandal once can touch, but it confounds the breather. Anybody who would accuse me in public would be confounded because I've got this reputation. What he's not counting on is what? The Duke. The Duke in disguise, who knows it all, sees it all, is in charge of it all. Then he says, he should have lived, meaning Claudio, save that his riotous youth with dangerous sense might in the times to come have ta'en revenge, by so receiving a dishonored life with ransom of such shame. So even Angelo recognizes that it is an outrage for Claudio to take his life from his sister's shame. And he thinks that if Claudio had lived, Angelo would be in danger of suffering revenge from Claudio, who is this passionate, ungoverned youth, right? Because he got himself in trouble. And then he says, would yet he had lived. Alack, when once our grace we have forgot, nothing goes right. We would and we would not. He's divided. He's at war with himself. He knows that he's done wrong, but he can't bear to lose his reputation. All right, questions. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll read the end of the play. Do you want a break, or do you want not a break? Keep going? Anyone need a break? No? Okay. I'm taking a break by taking a drink, and then we'll go. Okay, so what has the Duke done? He sent letters saying, I'm going to arrive with my people, I'm going to meet you outside the gates, and anybody who has a complaint can come and make it, so that we deal with it right away, and people don't later come up to me and tell me all the horrible things that happened while I was gone. Now, Shakespeare's going to have the Duke tighten and tighten and tighten the screws here on Angelo, as we'll see. So, the Duke has got Friar Peter to set up Isabel to speak to the Duke in public. Nobody knows except the certain people, the provost and Friar Peter, know that the Duke is really the friar, but nobody else does. We do. So, enter the Duke. He praises Angelo for good government. Give me your hand, line 13, and let the subject see to make them know that outward courtesies would fain proclaim favors that keep within. Come, Aeschylus, you must walk by us on our other hand. Great, you guys did a great job while I was gone. And then Isabella speaks. Justice, O royal Duke, veil your regard upon a wronged, I would fain have said, a maid. O worthy prince, dishonor not your eye by throwing it on any other object, till you have heard me in my true complaint and given me justice, 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 justice. 4 times. Relate your wrongs, says the Duke. In what? By whom? Be brief. Here is Lord Angelo shall give you justice. Reveal yourself to him. Okay, he knows what he's doing, right? We know what he's doing, right? But Angelo doesn't. Oh, worthy Duke, you bid me seek redemption of the devil. Hear me yourself, for that which I must speak must either punish me, not being believed, or wring redress from you. Hear me, oh, hear me, hear. Angelo, uh-oh. My lord, her wits, I fear me, are not firm. She hath been a suitor to me for her brother, cut off by course of justice. By course of justice, says Isabel. And she will speak most bitterly and strange. Most strange, but yet most truly will I speak. That Angelo's forsworn, is it not strange? That Angelo's a murderer, is it not strange? That Angelo is an adulterous thief, an hypocrite, a virgin violator, is it not strange and strange? Duke, nay, it is 10 times strange. It is not truer he is Angelo, then this is all as true as it is strange. Nay, it is 10 times true, for truth is truth to the end of reckoning. Duke, away with her, poor soul, she speaks this in the infirmity of sense. She's obviously crazy. O Prince, I conjure thee, as thou believest there is another comfort than this world, that thou neglect me not with that opinion that I am touched with madness. Make not impossible that which but seems unlike, meaning unlikely. 'Tis not impossible, but one, the wickedest caitiff on the ground, may seem as shy, as grave, as just, as absolute as Angelo. Even so may Angelo, in all his dressings, characters, titles, forms, be an arch villain. Believe it, royal prince. If he be less, he's nothing. But he's more, had I more name for badness. Duke, by mine honesty, if she be mad, as I believe no other, her madness hath the oddest frame of sense. Such a dependency of thing on thing as e'er I heard in madness. She's sounding like a rational being here. O gracious Duke, harp not on that, nor do not banish reason for inequality, but let your reason serve to make the truth appear where it seems hid, and hide the false seems true. Many that are not mad have sure more lack of reason. What would you say? Many that are not mad have more lack of reason than she seems to have. I am the sister of one Claudio, condemned upon the act of fornication to lose his head, condemned by Angelo. I, in probation of a sisterhood, was sent to by my brother, one Lucio, as then the messenger. That's high in it, like your grace. I came to her from Claudio and desired her to try her gracious fortune with Lord Angelo for her poor brother's pardon. Isabella, that's he indeed. He says to Lucio, you were not bid to speak. No, my good lord, nor wish to hold my peace. You didn't tell me to be quiet. I wish you now then. Pray you, take note of it. And when you have a business for yourself, pray heaven you then be perfect. Later, I'm going to deal with you. So they have this exchange with Lucio several times. Isabel, I went to this pernicious caitiff deputy. That's somewhat madly spoken. Pardon it, the phrase is to the matter. Mend it again. The matter, proceed, what's the point? In brief, to set the needless process by, how I persuaded, how I prayed and kneeled, how he refelled me, and how I replied, for this was of much length, the vile conclusion I now begin with grief and shame to utter. He would not, but by gift of my chaste body to his concupiscible intemperate lust, release my brother. And after much debatement, my sisterly remorse confutes mine honor, and I did yield to him. This is also a lie, as we know. But the next morn betimes his purpose surfeiting, he sends a warrant for my poor brother's head. That's true. This is most likely. I mean, come on. Oh, that it were as like, meaning likely, as it is true. By heaven, fond wretch, thou knowest not what thou speakst, or else thou art suborned against his honor in hateful practice, meaning plotting. Somebody set you up to plot against Angelo. First, his integrity stands without blemish. That's what it's all been about for Angelo, right? His reputation. Next, it imports no reason that with such vehemency he should pursue faults proper to himself. If he had so offended, he would have weighed thy brother by himself and not have cut him off. This is exactly what everyone was trying to get Angelo to recognize. Judge your brother by yourself. Look in yourself first. But he wouldn't do it. And the Duke is now publicly saying to Angelo, he wouldn't have behaved like that. He would have looked into himself first and shown some compassion. Someone hath set you on. Confess the truth and say by whose advice thou camest here to complain. And is this all, says Isabel? Then, O you blessed ministers above, meaning angels, keep me in patience, and with ripened time unfold the evil which is here wrapped up in countenance. Heaven shield your grace from woe, as I thus wronged, hence unbelieved go. Is that all I'm going to get? Okay, angels, I leave it up to you. Again, letting it go to heaven, and she's about to leave. But the Duke says, I know you'd fain be gone, you'd like to leave. An officer to prison with her. Shall we thus permit a blasting and a scandalous breath to fall on him so near us? This needs must be a practice, a plot. Who knew of your intent in coming hither? One that I would were here, Friar Lodowick. Who's Friar Lodowick? He, the Duke. A ghostly father belike. Who knows that Lodowick? Lucio, my lord, I know him. 'Tis a meddling friar. I do not like the man. Had he been lay, my lord, for certain words he spake against your grace in your retirement, I had swinged him soundly. I would have beaten him for some of the terrible things he said about you. Now, who is it that said the terrible things about him? Lucio. Words against me, that's a good friar belike. And to set on this wretched woman here against our substitute, meaning Angelo, let this friar be found. I saw them in the prison, a saucy friar, a scurvy fellow. And Friar Peter speaks up. Blessed be your royal grace, I have stood by, my lord, and I have heard your royal ear abused. First, hath this woman most wrongfully accused your substitute, who is as free from touch or soil with her as she from one ungot. That's true, because Angelo never touched Isabel, in fact. We did believe no less. Know you that Friar Lodowick that she speaks of? I know him for a man divine and holy, not scurvy nor a temporary meddler, as he's reported by this gentleman, Lucio, and on my trust a man that never yet did, as he vouches, misreport your grace. My lord, most villainously, believe it. Well, he's sick right now of a strange fever. The fever is the fever that is riddling Vienna with sin and lust and corruption. So he's in disguise. So I came hither to speak as from his mouth what he doth know is true and false. First, for this woman to justify this worthy nobleman so vulgarly and personally accused, her shall you hear disprove it to her eyes till she herself confess it. You're going to hear that Angelo didn't sleep with Isabel. And she's going to admit it. Good friar, let's hear it. Do not smile at this, Lord Angelo. Here's what I mean by tightening the screws. Oh, heaven, the vanity of wretched fools. Give us some seats. Come, cousin Angelo. In this, I'll be impartial. Be you judge of your own cause, your own case. Is this the witness, friar? First let her show her face and after speak. So Mariana comes in, covered up. Pardon, my lord, I will not show my face until my husband bid me. Who's her husband? Angelo. Is he really now her husband? Yes. Why? Because if you make this agreement to be married, you're betrothed, it's consummated by the sexual act, and now they're married.
So then why doesn't that work for Claudio?
That's why Isabel said, let him marry her in church. Because there are these two governments. There's the government of the state, and there's the church. And you have to satisfy both. That's what the marriage ceremony is. But legally, they're not married until the marriage is consummated, and then they're married in the eyes of the state.
But by that logic, then Claudio and
And that's why Claudio said, you know the lady, she is fast my wife, but we just lack this outward order of the church, right? The wedding ceremony. So they're in exactly parallel situations. And that's the genius of the plot. They are exactly in identical situations now. Okay, so, what, are you married? Mariana, no, my lord. So she's got a husband, but they're not officially married by the church. Are you a maid? No, my lord. She's no longer a virgin. A widow then? Neither, my lord. Why, you are nothing then, neither maid, widow, nor wife. Those are the three possibilities. Except Lucio adds, my lord, she may be a punk, meaning a whore, for many of them are neither maid, widow, nor wife. Silence that fellow. I would he had some cause to prattle for himself. Well, my lord. My lord, says Mariana, I do confess I ne'er was married, and I confess besides I am no maid. I have known my husband, yet my husband knows not that ever he knew me. So this is to know in both senses of the word, to know that they have known one another sexually. He was drunk then, my lord, can be no better, says Lucio. For the benefit of silence would thou wert so too. This is no witness for Lord Angelo. Mariana, now I come to it, my lord. She that accuses him of fornication, in selfsame manner doth accuse my husband, and charges him, my lord, with such a time when I'll depose, meaning I'll swear in court, that I had him in mine arms with all the effect of love. Angelo, charges she more than me? Mariana, not that I know. No? You say your husband? Why, just, my lord, and that is Angelo, who thinks he knows that he ne'er knew my body, but knows, he thinks, that he knows Isabel's. This is a strange abuse. Let's see thy face. My husband bids me. Now I will unmask. She unveils her face. This is that face, thou cruel Angelo, which once thou sworest was worth the looking on. This is the hand which with a vowed contract was fast belocked in thine. This is the body that took away the match from Isabel and did supply thee at thy garden house in her imagined person. Duke, know you this woman? He says to Angelo. And Lucio says, carnally, she says. We've got comedy running under this all the way through. Sirrah, no more, enough, my lord. My lord, I must confess I know this woman, and 5 years since there was some speech of marriage betwixt myself and her, which was broke off, partly for that her promised proportions came short of composition. She didn't have the dowry because it was lost at sea. But in chief, for that her reputation was disvalued in levity, lightness, looks, Lucas, Lucio. She was accused of unchastity. Since which time of 5 years, I never spake with her, saw her, nor heard from her, upon my faith and honor. Mariana, noble prince, she jumps on his line. I have a lot of interlocking lines. As there comes light from heaven and words from breath, as there is sense in truth and truth in virtue, I am affianced this man's wife as strongly as words could make up vows. And, my good lord, but Tuesday night last gone in his garden house, he knew me as a wife. As this is true, let me in safety raise me from my knees, or else forever be confixed here a marble monument. And she kneels. Angelo, I did but smile till now. Now, good my lord, give me the scope of justice. My patience here is touched. I do perceive these poor informal women are no more but instruments of some more mightier member that sets them on. That's also true. The mightier member, however, is the Duke. Let me have way, my lord, to find this practice, this plot out. "Aye, with my heart," says the Duke, "and punish them to your height of pleasure. Thou foolish friar, and thou pernicious woman, compact with her that's gone. Thinkst thou thy oaths, though they would swear down each particular saint, were testimonies against his worth and credit that's sealed in approbation? You think your word can stand up against Angelo's? You, Lord Aeschylus, sit with my cousin," meaning Angelo. Lend him your kind pains to find out this abuse, whence 'tis derived. There is another friar that set them on. Let him be sent for." So they go fetch him. "And you, my noble and well-warranted cousin, whom it concerns to hear this matter forth, do with your injuries as seems you best in any chastisement. I for a while will leave you, but stir not you till you have well determined upon these slanderers. My lord will do it thoroughly." So then they go through the questioning process. Lucio says, "Cucullus non facit monachum." The cowl doesn't make the monk. So he's a bad monk. But in comes the Duke, now dressed as Friar Lodowick. So he's got a cowl over his face. Nobody can see his face. There's some byplay with Lucio and Aeschylus. The Duke says, as the friar, "Where is the Duke? 'Tis he should hear me speak." Aeschylus, "The Duke's in us, and we will hear you speak. Look, you speak justly." "Boldly at least," he says. "But oh, poor souls, come you to seek the lamb here of the fox? Good night to your redress. Is the Duke gone? Then is your cause gone too. The Duke's unjust. Thus to retort your manifest appeal and put your trial in the villain's mouth, which here you come to accuse." Whoa. The Duke's unjust? Slander. The villain? Angelo is a villain? Slander. As if it isn't true. Lucio, this is the rascal, this is he I spoke of. "Why, thou unreverend and unhallowed friar, is it not enough thou hast suborned these women to accuse this worthy man," meaning Angelo, "but in foul mouth and in the witness of his proper ear to call him villain, and then to glance from him to the Duke himself to tax him with injustice? Take him hence to the rack with him." Now, this would be right if it weren't the Duke, right? You don't let people say this in public about the Duke. "We'll touse you joint by joint, but we will know his purpose." What, unjust? "Be not so hot," says Friar Lodowick, the Duke. The Duke dare no more stretch this finger of mine than he dare rack his own." Okay, we're all getting the joke. "His subject am I not," that's also true. "Nor here provincial. My business in this state made me a looker on here in Vienna, where I have seen corruption boil and bubble till it o'errun the stew. Laws for all faults, but faults so countenanced that the strong statutes stand like the forfeits in a barber's shop, as much in mock as mark." Remember those twigs that are hung up to scare the kids, but they're never used, and so they don't, and he's saying it again. This is the third time the idea appears in the play. And Aeschylus says, "Slander to the state. Away with him to prison." What can you vouch against him, Signor Lucio? Is this the man you did tell us of? "'Tis he, my lord." "Come hither, goodman Baldpate." Why does he call him Baldpate? Because monks shave the top of their heads in a tonsure. So he's being condescending. "Do you know me?" "I remember you, sir, by the sound of your voice. I met you at the prison in the absence of the Duke." "Oh, did you so? And do you remember what you said of the Duke?" "Most notedly, sir." "Do you, sir? And was the Duke a fleshmonger, a fool, and a coward, as you then reported him to be? You must, sir, change persons with me ere you make that my report. You indeed spoke so of him, and much more, much worse." "Oh, thou damnable fellow." Away with him to prison, away with him to prison. The provost lays hands on the Duke. "What, resists he? Help him, Lucio. Come, sir, come, sir, come, sir. Why, sir, why, you bald-pated lying rascal, you must be hooded, must you? Show your knave's visage with a pox to you. Show your sheep-biting face and be hanged an hour. Will it not off?" And he pulls off the friar's hood. Duke, thou art the first knave that ever madest a duke. First, Provost, let me bail these gentle three, that is, Mariana, Isabel, and Friar Peter. Sneak not away, sir, he says to Lucio, for the friar and you must have a word anon. Lay hold on him. Lucio, this may prove worse than hanging. It's about to Aeschylus. What you have spoke, I pardon. First thing, what has Aeschylus said that he has to pardon? Away with him to prison. He's called him names. He's accused him of maligning the state, because he has maligned the state. So the first thing he does is forgive Aeschylus. You weren't wrong. Sit you down. We'll borrow place of him. Angelo. Sir, by your leave, hast thou or word, or wit, or impudence that can do the office? If thou hast, rely upon it till my tale be heard and hold no longer out. I'm going to tell the story. Do you have anything to say for yourself? And Angelo, before he says a word, oh, my dread Lord, I should be guiltier than my guiltiness to think I can be undiscernible when I perceive your grace, like power divine, hath looked upon my passes. Now this is where the play becomes almost transparent to allegory. Like power divine. The Duke does stand for the power divine. And because everything in the hierarchy is a parallel to everything else in the hierarchy. So as the Duke is acting in Vienna, so is God acting in the world. Justice and mercy, right? And omniscience. He knows everything that's gone on. And suddenly Angelo realizes it. Then, good prince, no longer session hold upon my shame, but let my trial be mine own confession. Immediate sentence then and sequent death is all the grace I beg. Remember he'd said, if you catch me doing it, put me to death. Well, he's caught. And now he says he's as good as his word. There's something good in Angelo. There's something all along that's wanted to be good. He hasn't been good. He's thought he was better than he was. He thought he was a saint. But at this point, he is at least being just to himself, because he deserves this. Duke, come hither, Mariana. Say, wast thou e'er contracted to this woman? I was, my lord. Go take her hence and marry her instantly. That's what Isabel said at the beginning. Let him marry her. Do you the office, friar, which consummate, return him here again. Go with him, provost. So they go off to get married. Aeschylus, my lord, I am more amazed at his dishonor than at the strangeness of it. Come hither, Isabel, your friar is now your prince. As I was then advertising and holy to your business, not changing heart with habit, I am still attorneyed at your service. And she says, oh, give me pardon, that I, your vassal, have employed and pained your unknown sovereignty. I'm so sorry you've had to go to all this trouble. You are pardoned, Isabel, and now, dear maid, be you as free to us. Your brother's death, I know, sits at your heart, and you may marvel why I obscured myself, laboring to save his life, and would not rather make rash remonstrance of my hidden power than let him be so be lost. Oh, most kind maid, it was the swift celerity of his death, which I did think with slower foot came on, that brained my purpose. He's lying again. Why? We'll talk about it in a minute. But peace be with him. That life is better left past fearing death than that which lives to fear. Make it your comfort. So happy is your brother. I do, my lord. In other words, she is consoled by hope for Claudio's eternal soul. The Duke tried, but it got past him too quickly, and he couldn't save it. For this new married man approaching here, whose salt imagination yet hath wronged your well-defended honor, you must pardon for Mariana's sake, meaning Angelo. But as he adjudged your brother being criminal in double violation of sacred chastity and of promise breach, thereon dependent, for your brother's life, the very mercy of the law cries out, most audible even from his proper tongue, an Angelo for Claudio, death for death. Haste still pays haste, and leisure answers leisure, like doth quit like, and measure still for measure. Matthew 7:2, as you measure, so shall it be measured unto you. Then Angelo, thy faults thus manifested, which though thou wouldst deny, denies thee vantage. We do condemn thee to the very block where Claudio stooped to death, and with like haste, away with him. He deserves it, right? Mariana, oh, my most gracious Lord, I hope you will not mock me with a husband. You got me married to him finally, and now you're going to kill him? It is your husband mocked you with a husband. Consenting to the safeguard of your honor, I thought your marriage fit. Else imputation for that he knew you might reproach your life and choke your good to come. For his possessions, although by confiscation they are ours, we do instate and widow you with all, to buy you a better husband. She gets her dowry this way. All of Angelo's property goes to her. Oh, my dear Lord, I crave no other nor no better man. Never crave him. We are definitive. He's sounding like Angelo, right? On purpose. Gentle my liege, you do but lose your labor. Away with him to death. Now, sir, to you. Oh, my good Lord, she doesn't stop. Just what Isabel was doing for her brother when she realized, sweet Isabel, take my part. Lend me your knees, and all my life to come I'll lend you all my life to do your service. She's asking Isabel to kneel for mercy for Angelo. The Duke says, tightening the screws some more, against all sense you do importune her. Should she kneel down in mercy of this fact? Her brother's ghost his paved bed would break and take her hence in horror. How can she kneel in mercy for Angelo after what he's done to her brother? Mariana says, Isabel, sweet Isabel, do yet but kneel by me. Hold up your hands, say nothing, I'll speak all. They say best men are molded out of faults, and for the most become much more the better for being a little bad. So may my husband. Oh, Isabel, will you not lend a knee? Duke, he dies for Claudio's death. Isabella kneels. It's one of the most moving gestures in all drama. Most bounteous sir, look, if it please you, on this man condemned, as if my brother lived. I partly think a due sincerity governed his deeds, till he did look on me. Since it is so, let him not die. My brother had but justice, in that he did the thing for which he died. For Angelo, his act did not o'ertake his bad intent, and must be buried but as an intent that perished by the way. Thoughts are no subjects, intents but merely thoughts. Merely, my lord, says Mariana.
But he did a lot more than think. I mean,
But it wasn't Isabel.
but still, it was a maid.
Well, I know.
It was a maid, and then he went against his word.
And that's what the Duke says. Mariana says, merely, my lord, she's reiterating it, and the Duke says, your suit's unprofitable. Stand up, I say. I have bethought me of another fault. Provost, how came it Claudio was beheaded at an unusual hour? It was commanded so. Had you a special warrant for the deed? No, my good lord, it was by private message. For which I do discharge you of your office. Give up your keys. Now this is also public show because he and the provost are in cahoots. Pardon me, noble lord, I thought it was a fault, but knew it not, yet did repent me after more advice, for testimony whereof, one in the prison that should by private order else have died, I have reserved alive. What's he? His name is Barnardine. I would thou hadst done so by Claudio. Go, fetch him hither. Let me look upon him. Aeschylus says to Angelo, I am sorry one so learned and so wise as you, Lord Angelo, have still appeared, meaning always appeared, should slip so grossly, both in the heat of blood and lack of tempered judgment afterward. I can't believe that you did this. Angelo says, I am sorry that such sorrow I procure, and so deep sticks it in my penitent heart that I crave death more willingly than mercy. 'Tis my deserving, and I do entreat it. So he's being true to his word. If you catch me, put me to death. And now he's asking for it. So the Duke says to Barnardine, there was a friar told me of this man, Sirrah, thou art said to have a stubborn soul that apprehends no further than this world and squares thy life according. Barnardine thinks that the only thing in the world is this life. That's what Claudio is playing with. Thou art condemned, but for those earthly faults I quit them all, and pray thee take this mercy to provide for better times to come. Friar, advise him. I leave him to your hand. So the Duke forgives Barnardine, the murderer. It would be cruel to put him to death. He's in no condition to die. He needs to repent. Provost, this is another prisoner that I saved who should have died when Claudio lost his head, as like almost to Claudio as himself. He's preparing us not to die of shock, takes off the hood of Claudio. It's Claudio. He's alive. Okay, hold the place. Here it is. Act 4, Scene 3, line 106, let's say. It's Act 4, Scene 3, when Isabel's coming to hear the results of the bed trick. She's come to know if yet her brother's pardon be come hither. But I will keep her ignorant of her good, to make her heavenly comforts of despair when it is least expected. I've got another agenda for her. It's partly to make her heavenly comforts when she least expects it. It's partly to test her. And by now, we know that she's passed the test. What was the test? Is she going to kneel with Mariana? And she does. She is the embodiment of mercy. And she started the scene, justice, 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 justice. And now she wants mercy. And so now he unmuffles Claudio and he's alive. It's a resurrection. It's a kind of stage proof that Isabel's idea of the next life was true all along. If he be like your brother, for his sake is he pardoned, and for your lovely sake. That is, he's pardoning Claudio. Give me your hand and say you will be mine. He is my brother too. But fitter time for that. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. But by this Lord Angelo perceives he's safe. Methinks I see a quickening in his eye. He's going to live. He didn't actually kill Claudio, and he didn't actually sleep with Isabel. Well, Angelo, your evil quits you well. Look that you love your wife, her worth yours. I find an apt remission in myself. I'm finding myself enjoying forgiving people. Yet here's one in place I cannot pardon. To Lucio, you, Sirrah, that knew me for a fool, a coward, one all of luxury, an ass, a madman. Wherein have I so deserved of you that you extol me thus? Faith, my lord, I spoke it but according to the trick. If you will hang me for it, you may, but I'd rather it would please you I might be whipped. Whipped first, sir, and hanged after. Proclaim it, provost, round about the city. If any woman wronged by this lewd fellow, as I've heard him swear himself there's one whom he begot with child, let her appear and he shall marry her. The nuptial finished, let him be whipped and hanged. Lucio, I beseech your highness, do not marry me to a whore. Your highness said even now I made you a duke. Good my lord, do not recompense me by making me a cuckold. Upon mine honor thou shalt marry her. Thy slanders I forgive, and therewithal remit thy other forfeits. No whipping, no hanging, but you are going to marry that girl. Take him to prison and see our pleasure here and execute it. Marrying a punk, my lord, is pressing to death, whipping and hanging. Slandering a prince deserves it. She, Claudio, that you wronged, look you restore. That's Juliet. Joy to you, Mariana. Love her, Angelo. I have confessed her, and I know her virtue. Thanks, good friend Aeschylus, for thy much goodness. There's more behind that is more gratulate. I have more to reward you with. Thanks, Provost, for thy care and secrecy. We shall employ thee in a worthier place. Forgive him, Angelo, that brought you home the head of Ragozine for Claudio's. The offense pardons itself. Dear Isabel, I have a motion much imports your good, whereto if you'll a willing ear incline, what's mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. So bring us to our place, so bring us to our palace, where we'll show what's yet behind that's meet you all should know. We'll finish out the story there. All right, so he's asking Isabel to marry him, and the play ends. And she doesn't say anything. And modern directors have had Isabel look at him, spit, and storm off, missing the whole point. And what is the point? We started by talking about justice and mercy. Everybody who's a ruler has to temper justice with mercy. So the Duke, in a sense, embodies justice. And by the end of the play, Isabel embodies mercy. She wants mercy for her brother, and she wants mercy even for Angelo. She's called for justice, and the Duke is being very merciful at the end. So the marriage of the two is the perfect marriage, not only of justice and mercy, but of the just and merciful ruler and the just and merciful, virtuous young woman. Why does she say, no, I can't marry you, I'm going to be a nun in a convent? Because Vienna is converted. Everything's now changed. The Duke has cleaned things up, with Angelo's help. She doesn't need to escape Vienna into the convent. She's protected by marrying the Duke. And she's a perfect match for him because of her virtue throughout. So, back to Philip Thompson. The meaning of Isabella's lines when she says to her brother, die, perish, might but my bending down reprieve thee from thy fate, it should proceed. I'll pray 1,000 prayers for thy death, no word to save thee. The meaning is an unexpected one. The statement is certainly opposed to charity, but you could say that in such a situation, an act of charity could be expected only of a saint. What some see in Claudio as only a natural weakness, Isabella feels as a mortal assault. And it is for this violent crime that she personally condemns him to death, as anyone but a saint would condemn to death his murderous assailant at the moment of attack. Claudio's crime here is like Angelo's in being the fruit of weakness. And it is as bad as Angelo's in its disregard of everything but the weakness inspiring it. To gain the power to repudiate his crime against her, his only sin, Claudio needed to feel the fury of her swift and devastating judgment, which is judgment itself. Her prayers for his death are prayers for his good death. Forgiveness of sins and judgment are not contraries. Reflecting, I forgive any man any sin against me because I wish all sinners, every man, to overthrow the government of sin and to find the salvation established by divine forgiveness. Suffering at the hands of sin, I resist it with the judgment and the hope that the wages of sin is death, and Claudio concurs. I cannot see Isabella's spiritual refinement as an aspect of the play. And then he says, And doesn't anyone notice that by afflicting him with justice, Isabella makes him a just man? When the play's action is concluded, ask Claudio if he resents his sister's passion for purity. Does the critic accusing Isabella simply take offense at her tone, or does he actually want her to make the sacrifice Claudio proposes? If the latter, how does he see the play proceeding from this change? Is the spread of corruption preferable to healing? The result would be a Vienna much more like hell than it was when the Duke laid his design to reform it. Her fury saved Claudio from real corruption, and because of this spiritual regeneration, the saving of his life increases the virtue and the joy of a redeemed Vienna. His soul would have been lost if Isabella had not portrayed him to himself as a lost soul. And then Philip says, enough! These things are simple and deep. Simple and deep. Okay, so the play has a happy ending, but the play also has a marriage ending, and the marriage is the marriage of justice and mercy in the Duke, in Isabel, and of course, between them. And it makes us see that marriage is possible and desirable and healing. And it also becomes a figure, the end of the play, for the ultimate judgment of God, who judges with both perfect justice and perfect mercy, and welcomes us, like Claudio, back to eternal life from this world of paradox and conflict, which causes so much anguish and suffering, but which is redeemable through repentance, through the wedding or the tempering of justice and mercy.